take care of some of the perfunctory things at this point in time. Yeah, I guess the continue button. So welcome to the meeting of the Tiverton Harbor Commission, February 1st, 2021. Chair of this, and we have with us this evening members David Stewart, Greg Banner, Paul Duarte, Charles Lawrence, Andy Sundberg, Phyllis Idebottom. Absent are Jason Clemart and Roger Winiarski. Also as visiting council people, we have Deb Janik, Donna Cook, and Bill Vieira. So we don't forget about it, anyone have the opportunity to review the minutes of January 4th, 2021, despite my typo on the agenda when I say it's 201.
I did.
Any comments?
Nope, they're fine.
Motion, please.
I make a motion to accept.
I'll second that.
A motion to accept the minutes. All those in favor, I'll do a roll call. David Stewart,
Yes.
Greg Banner,
Yes.
Paul Duarte,
Aye.
Charles Lawrence,
Aye.
Andy Sundberg,
Yes.
Phyllis Idebottom,
Yes,
Ibbotson.
Ibbotson.
I will get it sooner or later. I apologize. I will
that's
get
okay. That's all right.
Got to do it phonetically over
Just-
here.
Phyllis is fine too.
Anyhow, okay. I sent to the commission the correspondence we received and that we sent out, the letters regarding the dock, and then the summary of findings from CRMC relative to the application, the preliminary determination report from Bob Boehringer and his partner for the aquaculture project that's going to be a little bit west of Jack's Island and south of Jack's Island, the access. If anyone has any questions, that will be on a CMC council meeting agenda, but it's a pretty thorough report and I think they listened to us well. Next, I'd like a quick motion to move us to new item G, which is the meeting focus this evening on sea level rise as presented by Dr. Charles Lawrence, retired professor of Brown University of Applied Mathematics, so that people know that we're dealing with somebody who knows what they're talking about. Can I please have a motion?
I'll make that motion. Paul Duarte.
I second it.
Okay. And roll call votes, if I may, starting with Phyllis Idebottom. Ibbotson, there we go, Ibbotson, I'll get it. Phyllis, you approve the motion?
Sorry. Yes, sorry.
Andy?
Aye.
Charles?
Aye.
Paul?
Yes.
Greg?
Yes, and I missed who seconded. Who seconded?
That would be Dave Stewart. And Dave Stewart?
Yes, sir.
And I chair votes, so we're on deck there, Chip. It's all yours.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. You seeing it?
Yes.
Okay, so let me get this in this mode. Okay, so tonight I'll talk about climate change and sea level rise and its effect on Rhode Island. Yes, I am a professor of applied mathematics at Brown. I have done applications in genomics and climatology. Most of my applications have to do with probability and statistics applied to those two subjects. I am a member of the Harbor Commission. Okay, so I'd like to talk about this. So the Earth is heating up very fast. Our planet has been hotter than it is now, actually a lot hotter in the history of the planet. I happen to study that history of part of climatology. They call that paleoclimatology. You may hear me say that. However, it hasn't risen this fast. And my colleagues have looked back, millions of years, tens of millions of years, and they've never seen a place, based on the records that are buried in the ocean sediments, that it's risen this fast. Wow. So the big question is, can humans and other species tolerate with it going this fast? Are we fast enough to adapt? It won't be stoppable if we don't reduce greenhouse gases. We're already at the point where we have to stop, or we're going to get past, I'll mention, at a tipping point. My goal is to explain why this is true and how it will damage Tiverton if we go beyond this tipping point. So the record temperature for the most recent year that it's been reported for the Earth is 2019. That ties with 2016, but it should have been cooler than that. 2019 should be cooler because that was a year of La Nina. And when it's La Nina, the Earth is cooler. So it ties with a time when it should be high, then it's worrying, let's put it that way. And humans are already having an impact. In fact, climate scientists who study this and who do the models, one of them is a friend and a colleague of mine, collaborator of mine in applied math, who runs those models. At any rate, they didn't expect the events that we've seen in the last few years to happen, that we've seen in the last few years. They thought that was maybe another decade out. So the last year was bad news for impacts on the warming of the Earth. It was really readily apparent. We had these big fires, right? Siberia, Australia, California. In California, it's a classic. They had droughts for a lot of years. The weather has been changing. Climate scientists predicted that would happen, just not quite as much as it has already. And then it was all set up for these big fires. And those fires burned a lot of California and even more of Australia and Siberia. And now they're having big rains. Well, that'll be good for this summer. The trouble is, where all those trees burned, there's nothing to hold the soil. So mudslides, and you may have seen the picture of Highway 1 being wiped out, right? That's part of that is the land above it that it higher. And so much more became unstable because you don't have those trees roots holding things in place. This is just a picture from the Gulf Coast. They had those repeated storms down there. Yeah. Look at the size of that craft washed up next to the highway. And streets were swamped. So all this has happened, and all in this one year. And the thing about the storms that happened this year was something you could well predict. And that was that the ocean temperatures have already warmed. And of course, warm water evaporates more quickly. That not only makes for more rain when it gets there, but most of the energy, when you hear the weatherman talk about the energy shifting to offshore, what the weatherman or weatherwoman is talking about is that the water vapor has transferred offshore. That's latent heat, right? When that condenses, it releases heat. That's mostly what's the driving force when we have a storm, that condensation, right? So at any rate, that's what has happened. And that's what happens more when you have warmer water, of Of course, it evaporates, right? There's going to be more in the air, and you have more potential for big rains. And not only that, more of those, right? And storms like this. So there are these tipping points in climate dynamics. The Earth system is what we in applied math call a nonlinear dynamic system. Such systems can have more than one behavior, and they can switch from one behavior to another at just a small change. If it's built up to the conditions that small changes, it will be enough. So these systems have tipping points after which the system can abruptly change its behavior and dramatically change its behavior. And in physics, they call these phase transitions. The systems that quickly change state, those things are often known as chaos, but they have multiple states and they'll switch from one to another that can be dramatically changed. Maybe you've heard of that story about a butterfly flaps in Southeast Asia or whatever, and then we have a big storm over here, right? Or we have the weather change for quite a long while. Yeah, small things can make the difference and a big difference. So in the history of the Earth, we've seen this before. So paleoclimatologists, where this is the present, this is years before present. So we're going to look at the changes. We'd look in this direction, right? So this is the CO2 down here. And you can see it goes here. It's at or right around the time that the temperature is going to change. So CO2, you can see in the history of the Earth that it's a thing that's behind climate, behind change in temperature, right? Say nothing about all the good physics about why that should be true. And these can be sometimes pretty abrupt. Have sudden ones like this. There's actually been 11 cycles like this. So if I take you in this direction, right, from the past to the present, what we had is substantial cooling, had that, and then suddenly, and this builds up glaciers, and then suddenly they melt. Those are called terminations. So this is glaciation, a termination. And they can have odd things happen in between. So if we get up here close to our time, we had another one of these terminations, and then it gets cooler and cooler until some key point, and then there's an abrupt rise and change. I mean, I'm talking about this is 100 or 120,000 years, and this changes about 10,000 years. So we're right about there where my pointer is. We've been living in this sweet spot, right, for 10 or 12,000 years. Humans started to, become species that were in Africa first and then moving around the globe, roughly here. And yes, it was cold, but if you were in Africa near the equator, you could do it. And then they actually moved into Europe somewhere in here and managed to survive with the glaciers. And then terminations happened. They had to be careful about all the water was running off. But for about 10 or 12,000 years, we've just been in a nice warmer spot and very steady. And there's a little bit of that at the previous ones, but not very much. So at any rate, just I'm making some couple of different points here, right? That it has changed even more abruptly than I'm showing you here in the past, has gone up more abruptly than these indicate in temperature before and CO2. Those were things like volcanoes that could set that off, several of them. At any rate, so we see those changes. We can see CO2 and temperature doing those two things together. And those are the 4 intervals which the glaciers grew and then melted. And this one we call the current one the Holocene. You may have heard that climatologists are now suggesting that we call the current interval the anthropomorphism, right, for the interval that humans have set the climate. And that they may do that this coming year at the American Geophysical Union. I've been talking about it for a while. At any rate, so another way to see that this has actually had an impact, and had an impact already. So this is the amount of loss of mass in Greenland, right? Delta mass. And of course, as the glaciers melt, that raises the sea level. So it's been rising right along through, not too long after the beginning of the industrial age. And it's rising more and more. And then around 2003, it accelerates, right? We're rising at a constant temperature each year to here. We get to this point, and then there it starts melting more dramatically, right? So it accelerates so that its velocity, its change in time is higher. And, there's a couple more blips. It's concerned it may do that again. Almost certainly will if we don't do something about CO2 and other climate gases. So it happens suddenly. That's one of my points. These things can happen suddenly. You're all familiar with the behavior of water. And water has, as we well know, 2 tipping points, right? Those are phase changes, right? Water can go from water vapor to liquid. Yep, we know that happens. And the liquid water can go over to ice, and they can go backwards. And obviously, those 3 states of matter are really very different. Now, when the water condenses depends upon how much water there is, right, at the dew point. When ice melts under normal sea level conditions, we know it all happens at 32 degrees. So suppose we put 2 identical pots on the stove and turned it on to the same level of heat for those, both for 10 minutes. In pot A, we had just water. It was water and just slightly above the freezing point, 32.1, I said. And the other pot was basically full of ice. So we do know that that does happen at 32, right? That the change is going to happen at 32. And then it will start to do how fast it tends. It depends how much energy is to do that, right? When the all-lay ice is melted, can you guess how much hotter the pot of water that had the pot that had only water, that is potted A, will be, right? When the ice is melted. 144 degrees. So when we change state, there's a lot of energy that can be released. And as I said, 32.1, just have to be patient. It will indeed all melt. Okay, so here we are back again. These abrupt changes. It's not clear that the Earth's climate has already reached the tipping point, but events that show these changes like this are certainly concerning. So climate scientists say they don't think it's happened yet, but we don't have much time. So there's 2 different factors behind sea level change rise, right? There's the melting of glaciers in Greenland and Antarctica, and there are troubling events that are happening in Greenland, and there's events that are happening in Antarctica, that the west half of Antarctica could have major loss of ice, glaciers that are actually resting on the bottom but sticking above the surface of the ocean because there's just so much weight, right? Those things could slip and suddenly fall into the ocean, and that almost certainly is going to happen if we don't do something about climate change. And not quite yet, but sooner than certainly in not in my lifetime, but probably in my grandson's lifetime, that might well happen. So the other reason sea level goes up, of course, is that when you heat anything, almost anything, it expands, right? So the expansion of the water, just because it's warmer, is the other thing that leads to sea level rise. So climate often has actually positive feedbacks, and those lead to tipping points. So the Earth has these tipping points, climate system does, with positive feedbacks. And my research group studies the history of these and the dynamics of these with model called filters. So pardon me if I keep sounding too much like a scientist and loving it. So the Earth, with these positive feedbacks, so when the Arctic Sea melts, it exposes more ocean water. And this has already happened. So the ocean water absorbs more solar energy than the sea ice does, right? The ice will reflect it off more than water will. And once that happens, you get rising temperature, and now you have more melting. Then more melting will mean more exposed water, more rise in temperature, more melting, and there we are in one of those positive feedback loops. The one that's even more troubling is the melting of permafrost. So permafrost limits the growth of bacteria. Basically, it's just like something in your freezer, right? When you put it in your freezer, the reason it doesn't, go bad is that bacteria are inhibited by being frozen. And that's what happened in the Arctic. So slow bacteria growth doesn't require much food, that is carbon, to produce CO2. But if the permafrost melts, then the bacteria get active and they make both CO2 and methane. Those are the heat trapping gases in the atmosphere. That makes it hotter, melts more permafrost. Bacteria keep going, make more CO2 and methane. That heats up the atmosphere, gets hotter, and there is another positive feedback. That's the one that's really troubling. And burning up in Siberia, and the senator from Alaska, a Republican, a conservative Republican, has really been one who's pushing this because they've seen how much it warmed up in Anchorage, right? Way up there, even further north than that. Or things that have to do with climate dynamics, which my colleague, Professor Baylor, Ox-Tempered, can explain. The Arctic is heating faster than anywhere else on Earth. Okay, so let's see how I'm going to work our way into how this will affect Tiverton. So here we are up in Greenland, right? And there's a current there, and this glacial ice is melting. That puts in fresh water, circulates around like this, comes down around Newfoundland. That forms the Labrador Current, right? Comes here off of Nova Scotia. It's headed down to New England. So more fresh water into the Labrador Current. and it's heading towards New England. Right, there it is. That's the Labrador. And then we can follow it on further down, and sure enough, it comes off of New England here. And so they've already seen this raise in temperature along the coast of New England, up here in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, in the Gulf of Maine, and off of Cape Cod and off of Rhode Island, and now sneaking down in towards Long Island. This out here, further out, is the Gulf Stream, but near shore, the temperature is going up. And it's going up more so here than otherwhere. So this is showing the relative change compared to the open ocean. And the explanation for why this is going on is that cold water comes down, and it riding on the surface of the salt water, it will ooze out into the Gulf Stream and basically get a feedback. It gets the Gulf Stream warmer water to move closer to shore. And so it definitely has been warming. And fishermen, right? We know that we noticed this. I noticed this. I'm a fisherman. I noticed this because I'm catching more sea bass now, right? And those were, not that we didn't catch them, we did. We just have quite an abundance and have had for the last couple of years. I'm expecting to see them more this year. And they used to be more common, not that we didn't have them here, but more common in New Jersey and less common here. And now we're getting more of them. So in the Gulf of Maine, it was rising gradually over time. About 2003 or 4, and it accelerated again. So the temperature went more rapidly there, way out here compared to its warming level. So it's an extreme thing. So this is big in the history of, it's a big switch in how fast it's warming. And this anomaly, difference in temperature. So that's what climatologists call it. It's a, how much does it change when they say an anomaly? And its credibility to the connection to the melting of Greenland, right, is affecting New England. So the pace of sea level rise is accelerating at nearly all measured stations along the US East Coast. Scientists are warning some of the scenarios where inundation and flooding are steadily becoming more likely, was in a recent article in The Guardian. So we should expect it, and we should expect it here. So what would this do to Tiverton? That's the next point I want to go to. So here we are. That's the Sconnet River Bridge. I'm sure you all recognize that. So if we had, this was 2 feet of sea level rise in a 25-year storm, right? Happens, 4% chance every year, that's what that means. Then look at all the places, excuse me. Look at all the places here that'll be completely flooded. All down here under the boat ramp, all north of there. The shops that are in here, Roger's shop. Right, oh, let me go here next. Fogland, there it is, getting overrun, just washing right over. We'll clean that bar right out. And it's really dramatic. So here's the town farm rec area and the Seapowet Bridge. Look at all those places that are just going to be submerged. Jack's Island in here, around over here. There's some higher ground when you get here. It will manage to be above water. My house is right over in here. The maps say that my house is above that, but my neighbors are going to be underwater. Right, so if we get a couple feet of sea level rise, which is quite likely here, I forgot the time scale, that's true, but 50 years if my memory's right, then lots of places in Tiverton can get flooded. So it's nice I've made all this warning and made a scary story, which I believe is the case. But what actions can Tiverton take? So we can push harder on renewable energy, make our contribution to that part of mitigating it instead of just having to adapt to it. And the point I want to make here specifically to the council is that when we have an issue, there will be competing issues when you want to put in a lot of solar panels, when you want to have a wind turbine and so on. There are going to be competing issues and people will have legitimate concerns. I'm not trying to dismiss those. However, we have to recognize when we're balancing those couple things off, that climate change is an exponential risk. If that happens, all these other considerations will be wiped off, not just so minor that it won't matter, right? We're going to get more storms just like they got on the Gulf. So buildings can well blow down, stronger hurricanes coming further north. And it just, so I'm just arguing, when you're doing those, keep in mind, this is big time compared to anything else in 50 years' time. The other thing I'd encourage that the town take action on is look at these maps. They were produced by Rhode Island, CMRC, if I remember right, was in conjunction with URI. And I can share those and give you the link, I'll do that. It shows what places are going to be flooded. So I believe we should tell the folks who are homeowners and businesses, here's the map. Notice your home or business is in that area. We want to warn you so you can make some decisions about what you're going to do, right? How are you going to adapt? Are you going to move? Are you going to try to raise the place or whatever choices you need to make? But I think we should warn them. And then I'd also like to recommend that the council appoint a climate change task force to recommend mitigation and adaptive steps. My suggestions for that is that you appoint members. This is focused on the commissions, right? So you have the Fogland Beach Commission, you have the Conservation Commission, you have the Harbor Commission. We have multiple commissions who have a direct interest in this. And I like to suggest that you appoint a task force selecting somebody from each one of those in order to be able to address what can the town do to adapt and to contribute to a mitigation. And you know better than I about whether we should invite business people and homeowners and other stakeholders, but maybe they should also be included. So at any rate, those are 3 points I can recommend. And sometimes you're having a hard time looking for somebody to lead such an effort. I'll raise my hand. I'm prepared to do that. I've recently retired from teaching from Brown. I'm still active in research, have students and postdocs, but it gives me more time to work on these things. If you're having a hard time getting somebody to lead it, you got to volunteer.
Thank you, Chip. I have a question. We're opening this up to questions from anybody at this point. I'm not aware of, I'm looking at participants. We have now 13, so we've had some people slide in, which is good. I have a question. If I understood you correct, one of your concerns is going to be, one of the concerns is the melting of the ice in Antarctica that's sitting on the continent of Antarctica and that basically falling into the ocean? Am I correct in that?
That's right. Part of what is the ice that you see there, glacier, it's on, you know, it is a continent. And so there really is places that are above sea level.
Right.
And most of it is. But there are glaciers, right, which are big enough that the weight of them pushes, right, if you put it, you know, that they are actually sitting underwater. The bottom of them is underwater.
Mm-hmm.
Just enough ice, it piles up and does that. Why they're of particular concern is as the southern oceans are warming up, they're undercutting underneath those glaciers, right? So undercutting underneath those glaciers and beginning to melt it. And that's the ones that the climate scientists are most worried about in Antarctica.
Because they'll fall into the ocean, as it were?
Yeah, because that warming of the water will be enough to get them to lose their grip and create cracks so that they can slip and slide into the ocean, right? And now have to be buoyant and thus push the sea level up.
Has any calculation been made as to the impact of that? I mean, that would be, if I.
Yeah, that would be several.
To end all.
If that happens at major scale, it would be feet worth of sea level rise. We're not talking about that tomorrow, right?
Mhm.
Probably none of our lifetimes. But our grandchildren, maybe.
A heck of a splash.
Oh, yeah.
And the fires in Siberia, how are they related to permafrost? Were they, you think, affecting permafrost melting, or connecting those two?
So they had fires in the forest in
Mhm.
Siberia,
Mm-hmm.
right? So big areas burned up there, releasing a lot of CO2, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that it was warm enough. It was incredibly warmer in Siberia than it's been in a very long time. And that dried things out. It's a couple of years worth of that, particularly this year. And then the fires got started like they did in other places, and they just ran out of control. And there, they don't have much access. So, and then they finally, I've forgotten, it rained or something, and it finally got stopped.
Right.
And the permafrost is melting, yes. Been documented in Alaska, in Siberia. Some interesting documentaries where they have that, where it's Siberian scientists who've been raising this point and now made a documentary. So even Putin seems to be worried.
In terms of the green energy, solar versus forestation, you know, I do a lot of development work. I'm working on a project that's up in Warren right now. We're putting a solar farm on a already deforested area. It's a golf course. But my client is, I'm not involved. I'm a lawyer for him. Are you aware of any balance analysis of solar versus deforestation? Because I know there are areas that are suddenly, you know, towns suddenly saying, whoa, wait a minute. I know Tiverton was up against that when applications came in and they're going to deforestate an area and put in solar.
I can find that out. I don't know right now of any particular study, but I know there have been studies. So I'll find that out and share it with the commission.
And whether it's
Of course, we have a lot of open land in Tiverton. So that would be preferable, right? The various farms, there's farmers who volunteered. I know there's one in Little Compton that did, right?
Yeah.
And so that's the easy ones. And then forest would not be favorable. We've got a landfill, which is going to be closed soon. There's a lot of area there.
Mm-hmm.
Put on solar panels. There's a couple sand pits. there are easy places for the town to move with this. What, do you know when they plan to close the landfill now? I know it's been delayed.
That answer, we got an extension for at least another year for the landfill. But I do think that someone had brought up the idea of using that for solar panels, and I think you cannot do anything on it for a period of time because they have to keep measuring it. So it's not something that would be in the foreseeable future.
I see.
I
So-
don't know the number of years, but that was brought up at some point.
Okay, so that's DEM who,
They manage, I think we have to actually do measurements for about 30 years after we close it.
yeah. So they can make the measurements, but maybe somewhere during that period, it would be possible to. Yeah, so
Correct.
I'm willing to contact folks in the state, investigate the issue, and bring back what I can find from, I guess it's DEM. Was there
I
anybody in
believe so.
particular there?
I don't know, Donna, do you,
It's
you-
it's a good 10 years before you can do anything because it has to stop packing down.
Uh-huh, yeah. Okay, so
I don't-
it'd still be somewhat delayed.
Yes,
So
It's
it's
gonna
not a
be
place
delayed.
we could start working on within the next year.
this is called a brown area. That would be good. Not personally in favor of deforestation. All of a sudden you don't have oxygen. I mean, it's just not making any sense to me. Anyway, I have some thoughts later on anyway.
Okay, I'm happy to chat with you about that and, and there are concerns. I'm not saying there aren't concerns, right?
I
The
know. but
trees
to
do
me-
absorb some.
I know, but this is just one point of view. I think you should always have another point of view. That's just my
Absolutely.
thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. We gotta, you gotta balance things and you have to listen to other folks, right? I mean, I'm a
Right.
scientist. That doesn't mean I know everything, of course, right? Yeah, so I have no trouble with that and I'd be happy to discuss this further and I'm happy I will look up what the balance is between, the trees and their ability to capture carbon. Seems to me, I happen to own some forest land in the Catskills in New York. My folks passed it down to my brother and I. And, if you grow it and harvest the trees, they try to set that up. The state forester's been there and we got a private forester helping us. If you do it at what they call maximum sustainable yield, then you're taking and fixing, that's hardwood there, that will be in buildings, right? So it's gonna be fixing the carbon for quite a few years. If you do it at that rate, you're growing it back as fast as you can and taking as much as you can to keep that balance. So in the forester who's helping us, that's how he's setting us up.
Well, I think a different point of view would be something to look at, the cost and the unintended consequences of deforestation, birds not having a place to go, butterflies, different other things.
Yep.
I think you need to look at that personally. I think the solar panels are very ugly to me. It's just very upsetting to see that. I
Yep.
just,
Well,
especially when it was a beautiful area to look at and now it's not.
yep.
So,
What-
but yeah, your point of view is a point of view. I just think there's another point of view with an expert and then maybe we can come to some decision or something, but it just can't be one point of view. It looks like you put a lot of time into this. I appreciate it.
Yeah, sure. Well, I do this, so for me, it was relatively easy to help explain the science and bring it down.
Hey,
Not that it's trivial. I'm not trying to minimize it.
hey, Greg here. I've got a question. I start off though with a statement about solar arrays and stuff, and just a comment that I have noticed on a lot of military bases, which I'm retired Army, and I happen to get to a lot of military bases for shopping and stuff. It appears to me they are deliberately building a lot of solar farms on parking lots, over the top of parking lots for the commissaries and the base exchanges and stuff, which to me seems like a perfect match, because you've got shade for the cars, especially in hot parts of the country. You're just putting it over asphalt, so you're not losing any kind of, forests or anything else. So we don't necessarily have huge parking lots in Tiverton, but maybe there's some spots where it would be a great fit to kind of look in that direction. But I've got a question though for Dr. Stewart about the state level activities in this realm. Is there a state commission? Is there anything at state level that mirrors what it is you're proposing for Tiverton that would be, we would benefit from linking to, or should be linking to automatically?
Well, there is a state level effort for sure, right? And there is a group that's addressing climate change and sea level rise. I've responded to them, and I'm planning to be at their next meeting. I've told them I'd like to work with them, but I have time now that I'm semi-retired. So yes, there is such a group. In Rhode Island, these maps I'm showing you, that was Rhode Island that did it. So Rhode Island, you're the ocean state, you get serious about sea level rise, and they have. Rhode Island is to be complimented. And most of the states that are on the coast get the message about it. Anything else?
Hi, good evening, Mr. Lawrence. My name is Bill Vieira. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Couple of questions. You mentioned the tipping point. When will we know when we're close to the tipping point? Will it be after the tipping point? Not that we should be aiming for the tipping point, but.
Yeah, no, of course, we're not going to aim for the tipping points. And so the climate dynamic models that my colleagues in geosciences at Brown, they tell me that, of course, different models give different dates, and the models are approximate, and as a result, in any given model, there are uncertainties. And as a result, what they do is they know things that they are uncertain about, and they run those across a range and see what happens when I rerun the model, allowing this one to change or that one to change, to basically try to cover the range that is the uncertainty that I expect to see.
Okay. You had mentioned 25 years and 50 years.
Yes.
Those maps.
I will
they
look up those
represent-
maps. My memory is it's 50 years.
Okay.
Right. They're on I can send the link to everybody. I'll send it to the Harbor Commission, and Bruce will help me get it to everybody else.
All right.
And so I'll send you that link where you can go and look at all the maps. They cover the whole state.
Did you ever think about reaching out to maybe like the high school, maybe the teachers, the science teachers there to educate?
Yeah. Let me go to my next slide. I'm going to share my screen again.
Okay.
Nice false albie.
So it turns out that municipalities and schools can do things about this. So it just so happens that my my nephew, Jacob Lawrence, did this. And through his efforts, working with the custodial staff who managed the boilers and so on, they saved the school district tens of thousands of dollars in equipment, in heating costs, and so on. So his district gave Jacob, who had a leave coming, they let him take this time in order to go through and work with this Cenogenics that has studied how to do this for municipalities, for towns, for businesses. And then Jacob went and examined all these places that there were opportunities. He found out, not surprisingly, that that the boilers could, for example, the boilers could be run more efficiently, and found several such things. There were easy opportunities to install extra insulation, and so on, and several things. It cost money to do this, but they came out substantially ahead. And that's something else I'd be willing to work on and investigate. And Jacob can hook me up on that. So, and yeah, he's a science teacher. So, contacting folks in the science folks in the school, maybe I can figure out who's who there. I know my wife has some contacts, so in order to find someone who would be appropriate and discuss this. And it would be good just for students to learn. They're the ones going to be more impacted than us. And maybe they would be able to follow an opportunity like this.
Thank you.
Okay.
Chip, just so I'm clear personally, the concept of a tipping point isn't a target, it's a disaster, correct? That's the point at which we tip to no return.
That's right. You go to a whole different behavior, right?
So things will suddenly become a lot worse. So it's sort of like the popular thing right now would be the run on the stock market. But there's a book I read called Tipping Point, and it dealt primarily with marketing and people's attitude changes when somebody or something promoted an item, suddenly, boom. I mean, well, we all of a sudden everyone had Reeboks, everyone had Nikes, that kind of example. So
Yeah. Well, certainly the market looks like they got some kind of potential tipping point now. It's certainly for the short run, it's behaving differently, right?
Right.
And
But
suddenly,
that's we won't go into that. It's a little far afield. But so the tipping points you're referring to are disaster points in terms of in the proximity of those where we can't stop it. The Earth is just in a continuous cycle of getting warmer and warmer, and the water's going to come up higher and higher.
So the water will go up higher and higher. The ice will melt. It is already in the Arctic, right? In the Arctic, ocean waters absorb more heat than the ice. Ice reflects most of it off. The water doesn't. Reflects some, but not nearly as much. And then it makes more, right? That makes it warmer, melts more ice, and there you're into one of those feedbacks, right? And it's in such systems that can switch from the behavior they've been doing for tens of thousands of years. There's been ice in the Arctic, and now it's disappearing. And in a short interval of time, a lot of it has already disappeared. And it is contributing to the warming of the globe. And the deal with the permafrost, right? Melts, softens up,
Right.
releases CO2 and methane, more heating, more melting of permafrost. Those are just a couple of examples that happen. Now, these things are built into these climate models, right? So my colleagues who do that, they have those in their models, and they got more data now. And now they basically had to catch up. Things happen faster than they predicted, so they have to readjust their model.
Does anyone
Can
else have any questions of
Yes.
Jeff while we have
You-
him on deck?
Can I ask another question?
By all means, Bill, this is open. This is an open forum. This is, my concern was that, you know, we tried to push it out so lots of people heard about it. And I was concerned that we're gonna have people come up and say this is a sham, so on and so forth. And, but no, open forum, please.
Have you looked at the New York model? I saw something that they're planning on spending billions of dollars of building out in order to, not that Rhode Island would probably spend that kind of money, but have you looked at New York and the billions of dollars that they're going to spend building out? And do you see other states possibly doing that?
Yeah, I have seen that. I saw an article, watched a video, maybe even attended a session, you know, went to one of those things I could watch on the web, in which they had said, well, New York's going to flood. Maybe we need to build this barrier across the front of New York Harbor, right, in order to be able to keep it from flooding. I have something similar ideas up in Boston. And I know that I read that CMRC has this plan. They investigated them and other actors, right, investigated various alternatives. And they came up with the cheapest thing to do was to just help people put their houses up on stilts. To me, that's pretty short-sighted. Because it's not just going to be those that are right next to shore that'll be impacted by climate change.
It'll be anybody inland that's at the same relative elevation.
Yeah, well, the flood, as I say, my house is high enough. It's not, you know, even in the scenarios I presented, it wouldn't flood. But there are going to be more other impacts too, right? Increasing temperatures, increasing seawater, more storms, some places droughts, some places more rain.
So the message tonight is that be aware of it and start looking seriously at the alternative energy issues. And
Yeah.
things we can promote to stop the greenhouse emissions.
Well, we can, you know, it's still feasible to do that. And I'm pleased we now have an administration that's going to make a major effort. You know, there's a number of things that troubled me about the previous administration, but one absolutely dominated, and that is this climate change, because all of my other concerns will become trivial or only highlighted if we don't address climate change. That's where I'm at. So it's like this issue is just dominating it because it'll be so powerful.
So what can this administration do? Can they pressure those countries? Like, I'm going to throw out China. I don't know if China's the biggest culprit of CO2 emissions per capita or whatever. Can they pressure through the UN those countries like China in CO2 emissions?
Yes, in fact, and they are engaged with China now that they have an administration. You know, there are troubles in China. I'm not saying that there aren't, right? But that doesn't mean that you can't do things to encourage them. And in fact, they've installed a lot of solar and wind turbines in their country. They're still burning coal, but they are building it out less quickly. The one that concerns me more is India, whose economy is not caught up, right? And you can't blame folks to want to have a warm house, right? For example, and have refrigeration. And a lot of India is very hot. Folks would like to have air conditioners, right? So I get it that it's not easy to do, but, you know, it's such a major change. So yes, and, you know, the Biden administration is going back to the international forum that first addressed this. It's the Paris climate change, rejoining that. There'll be another one, I think it's next year, if I remember right, in which they're going to try to get the countries to delineate the specific actions they're going to take and set targets for those actions. And so, and China has been a participant. In fact, it looked like that China was going to take the leadership on this. And, you know, if we're ignoring it, then you're just providing your adversary an opportunity to take leadership on an important issue. So I'm just, for that reason alone, I'm very pleased we have a different administration.
Hey, Greg again. The way, if nothing else, the way that I think normal homeowners that these issues might get their attention or do get their attention is when they have to pay flood insurance rates. Do those rates, which are based on the FEMA flood plans, do those reflect the dangers that you've just briefed us on, or are you thinking they are behind the times somewhat?
So yes, there have been predictions by URI in shorter terms than the maps I showed you. And there was an effort, and Dave Stewart, I think you remember this, where they were going to charge substantially higher rates to folks who lived in threats of flooding. And then there was a pushback from the communities that did that. And so they first made this effort, and they're going to start to charge the full cost of the insurance instead of having the taxpayer subsidize it, right? But then there was pushback, and the taxpayers are still subsidizing their, so this, I know this from.
This is true. You're right.
Yeah, that's what happened, right, Dave?
Right.
Yeah, so this happened on Eastern Long Island. I was born there. And, the dune would wash through and the county would come through and fix it up. There'd be some mansions out on the dune, and the taxpayers in Suffolk County finally had enough. And they said, if you want to fix that road, you pay for it. We're not going to do it anymore. And they got pushback from the politicians, but then they finally got it through. So, yes, it's already been through that cycle. Try to do something, let them pay the full rate instead of subsidy. And if they did, then they'd start getting more serious about building that close.
Yeah, the part of the issue was, it's a function of when you're involved in real estate. They did it like a switch. Instead of being a variable switch, it was an on-off switch. It went from being thoroughly subsidized to totally unsubsidized without real warning to the insurance industry that was going to happen. I guess they probably didn't believe it was going to happen. And you would see insurance quotes for a $300,000 or $400,000 house of $40,000 a year, or $250,000 worth of insurance. And so
you're suggesting you phase it in.
I think that's what they are in the process of doing, is trying to push people that way, and allowing certain, if you already had insurance, allow that to be transferred to the new owner. That happens now. It's a factor Dave can speak to from a real estate perspective as to the saleability of your house. If you have insurance, you can transfer it to the next person. If you don't, they're gonna whoever has to buy it for the first time, it's a bigger hit.
Okay, so this is another issue will take some doing to work out the specifics, but hopefully, do you know that there's some effort made now to try to gradually increase it, or
I'm not aware of it particularly.
I see.
One thing we have done, Bill and Donna, we looked into, and we actually have it, and I've got to dig through my files and find the names. It was back pre-COVID, unfortunately, of the two contacts with Verizon and with Narragansett, who own all the poles, the telephone poles. And to put on those poles, flood straps, what we'll call flood straps, in terms of showing you where the water is relative to the existing road height in a given flood situation. So that, we'll obviously, we need now to take the next step. That, okay, we had, one of Rogers had the idea of straps on the telephone poles, and there are guides and systems that exist down in Texas and such. We've looked at some of those. And, the telephone people were, willing to come to, play. They said, yeah, we can probably allow that to occur on our poles. So you have the heavy duty physical structure already there to attach to. Then we're going to need to have town endorsement about, okay, now we do this, what's the next step? How do we get this involved? Is it town employees? Do we get a volunteer staff going to do this? Because we're aware of the issue of flood significantly because of Chip and his involvement in our commission. And this was an idea that was developed in our commission, but now needs, for us to be going to the roadways is a little bit maybe outside of the purview of waterfront and harbors, but it's an idea that, can pass on. There you go.
This one.
There you
Yep. Flood gauges.
Right.
Not surprisingly, they got those in Houston.
Yeah. I wonder how well they hold up to the floodwaters screaming on by.
Better be in pretty solidly, huh?
Yeah, that's the joy of the telephone poles. They are, knock on wood, solid, no pun intended.
No. No. Well, that's an avenue to follow, and
All right.
so we'll exchange email, Bruce, and see what you found out. If we can find a contact,
Right.
right?
I'll dig through my.
If I have to follow up, I will.
I'll go back on the old packages because that's actually it's still on our standing agenda as well. We're now into the 8:15. I'd like to keep this at 8, an hour and a half max.
Okay.
But
Thank you for your attention.
I did, by the way, I think I told everybody I found the envelope, the missing Charles envelope, Charles Smith. And I had those scanned in by the Staples down the street. I've got those in a PDF format I can share with people. Those being the hydrological graphs at the bottom, showing the up by the Stone Bridge. So I'll find that email and share that with the group. And obviously Bill and Donna are liaison with the town council, so they'll be getting that because I'll just use the THC group email loop. Deb, if you want, I'll try to remember to put you on it. If you pop me an email, that'd be great. And that way it'll help me send it to my work and whatnot. But I think we're probably, anyone have any questions at all with Chip? If we don't have any other questions, I thank you, Chip, for a very thorough presentation.
It's great.
Bill,
Thank you for your attention.
Bill and Donna, and Jeb, do you think the whole council should, have this shown to them and presented to them as well, so that you get, or do you think you can carry that?
Be happy to do that.
I will share the YouTube video once it's posted tomorrow.
Okay.
We will hopefully get some interest in it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think it's timely with the new administration and global warming really coming to the forefront. I think it's very timely. And they're working on it from a worldwide perspective, but to look at it from Tiverton, we are the ocean state and still don't want to be totally flooded by the ocean, right? So I think this was very timely, and yeah, I think we can bring it up with the rest of the group.
I know that they wanted to present it to the town council last year, but COVID got in the way, and now COVID and the budget seems to take a lot of our time, but definitely something we need to make time for.
Well, whenever it's convenient for you. We're still under COVID, I'll do it then. If you want to wait until we can do it live, then I do it then too.
Great. Thank you for your passion.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I'm passionate about this. I got a grandson and I care a lot.
I know, but we still need another point of view. Can't just have one.
Of course.
Also, I'd really like to have people understand what the Paris Agreement really is. I think no one really understands it. So,
Okay, I can
really-
study up on that before I make
Yeah,
another presentation, include the Paris
so-
Agreement.
yeah, I mean, you really have to look at unintended consequences of everything. And because if you just go in one direction and not looking at the other, you can be somewhere you don't want to be also when
Well,
you're only doing one thing. So,
so perhaps we can get some specifics, somebody who knows about the counter argument.
well, I don't know. I mean, I can look into it, but I always like to have 2 points of view and then maybe.
Yeah.
come into
So it
some-
would help if we could find somebody who
Yeah.
would come with the other point of view.
Okay. And thank you for your thorough. It's not really a PowerPoint, but very, very good.
Well, I did it by PowerPoint, but yeah,
Okay. Very, very nicely done. Thank you.
thank you.
Yes, thank you for inviting us.
No, you're quite welcome. You're always obviously welcome to attend, but I mean, this we felt that was, very pertinent to Tiverton, and we have in our commission, we're very fortunate to have Chip as someone with so much in-depth knowledge.
Yes.
If I could move on now, just briefly to return to the agenda and wrap this up reasonably quickly so we can all have dinner, those of us who haven't had dinner yet. The investigate the US, I want to jump right over go back to the old business F1, and I don't know if we need to talk about the boat ramps this evening. I'd like to go to the coordination with the US Geological Survey. And Andy, you were the one grinding away on that. You're muted. Andy, you gotta unmute yourself.
Yep, just had to find the button. Yeah, I was able to display the data. Either the data set itself is skinnier than I thought, or it's just not useful to us. There's a very narrow strip in the Tiverton River that has data, and then north of the bridge there's more data, and then at the entrance to the Secana there's a little more data, but it's really kind of useless. But I was able to display it, and I was able to overlay it with great difficulty on a chart, but there's nothing really valuable in there for us.
Okay, so it focused not on the overall river, but on a cable zone, if I may.
Yeah, and what's interesting is I remember watching the vessel go up and down the river, and I even looked at its AIS, and it was literally going up and down the river, probably 2 meters apart through the entire river, and the data doesn't look like the path that the vessel was on. So I'm not sure whether maybe we got an incomplete set of the data or what, but the data set that I have is not useful.
Mm-hmm. That's too bad. Nothing in the basin.
No, not really.
Hmm. Yeah, they went back and forth for the longest time. Well, that's too bad. Well, we do have.
What comes to mind is, because I still have the contact info, maybe connect Andy with the people from the company, and he can explain what he found, and they can say either, yeah, that's what there was, or they can say, whoops, we forgot something, or maybe it was.
Greg, now that I've been able to display it and I'm somewhat intelligent about handling it, I'd be happy to have that conversation. Prior to this, I would have felt like I just wouldn't even know what they were saying. So yeah, I'd be happy to have that conversation.
Okay, I'll do that. I'll dig out the emails and the contacts and hook.
Okay.
Excellent. Thank you.
Do we have anything we didn't, what kind of data again, Andy, did you say that we were getting from that? What we did get? Was it bottom data?
It was bottom data.
Yeah.
And basically it's all represented as TIFF charts and not data elements. So it's exceedingly difficult to turn the information even if it were complete, it's exceedingly difficult to turn it into bottom soundings. All it is
Yeah.
really is just color images of the path.
Yeah, you would think that company would have been building some kind of 3D model of the whole bottom, and something that you could display as useful data. Yeah.
And maybe it's there, and I just couldn't bring it up. But at least now I know what I don't know.
Yeah, and nothing about velocities either. Nothing about.
No, absolutely nothing about that.
Yeah.
Okay. I think we can probably, the issues that really are pertinent at this moment would be, well, I haven't heard anything back from the DPW. I could make a point of trying to contact them about that. See if we can get a response from the correspondence that was sent, because it's been long enough now that, although they're probably a little busy with snow, aren't they? And the dinghy landing at the abutment. But I hope we got our message over to the town council relative to the idea of getting some backing on the idea of the flood hazard mitigation straps on the poles. I'll dig out those names out of the months old now, good to God, probably almost a year old files where those names are. And we haven't gotten any dates. I haven't settled down and gotten dates because I've been working too many nights professionally, quite candidly, to do that. I'll try this month to put together dates for that. It's frustrating in my own head as I look at it, to break it out and such. If someone wants to try to increment the harbor plan and make a suggestion on that, I'd be welcome to people's ideas on that. So don't be bashful.
What do you mean the counter plan? What do you mean?
Not a counter plan, no. Breaking the Harbor Commission plan up into increments to try to handle it as groups, as opposed to having everyone trying to do a screen share and such. Although screen sharing is pretty darned effective, I have found. I've liked it professionally, quite honestly. I'm doing presentations before boards. It's really pretty cool to have the engineer be able to very clearly on people's computer screens point out where things are. It eliminates a lot of, I can't see that, and running around with a plan and such. It's right there on the screen.
Another thing too, I don't know how long we're going to be in this COVID restrictions, but things are looking good as they're saying. Maybe by this fall we could actually meet in person again and get back to some type of half normal life. I don't know if it would be something that we could just put off until.
Yeah, I'd like to see if we can make some progress, because I think a lot of it could work well with a cooperative meeting. But yeah, I mean, I think you're right on the target time this fall for the sort of getting back to normal. And quite honestly, when I stop and think about it, there's nothing wrong with meeting together and also having our computers with their shared screens. A lot of people have a capability of doing that, so maybe do it at both elements. I mean, this is something my partner was saying, what do you think about where do you think we would be with the courts and WebEx, which is the court system of Zoom, if we didn't have COVID? Well, how many years do you think we would have been before we actually had that? And our guess was 10 years. And COVID sort of pushed the button. They make everyone have to jump up and say, you know what? And then finding out that it's not impossible. There's certain awkwardnesses to it, but it's not impossible. It can be very effective.
Yeah.
Very efficient. All right, Chip, I think I'm ready personally for dinner and your favorite motion.
Okay. I move we adjourn.
Hey,
Stewart seconds it. All
Okay,
those in favor?
all right.
All right.